My sister called me in tears. Mom died last night, she sobbed into the phone. The funeral is Friday. She left everything to me, so do not bother coming back. You get nothing. I held the phone away from my ear and just smiled. Why? Because my mother was standing right next to me sipping her morning tea and looking very much alive. My name is Amara, and at 32 years old, I make my living finding hidden money as a forensic accountant. But nothing prepared me for the fraud my own sister was trying to pull. Before I tell you how I turned her fake funeral into a courtroom nightmare, please hit that like button and subscribe. If you have ever been the black sheep of your family, let me know in the comments. This story is for you. The morning air in Martha's vineyard was crisp and smelled of salt water. It was the kind of peace you only find when you are hundreds of miles away from the chaos of Atlanta. I sat on the patio of our rented private villa watching the sunrise over the Atlantic Ocean. To my left, my mother, Mama Estelle, was moving slowly through her Tai Chi routine. At 65, she looked radiant. Her skin was glowing, and the tremor in her hands that had plagued her months ago was completely gone. We had spent the last 4 months here in secret, hiding from the world, and more specifically hiding from my sister Dominique. I took a sip of my coffee and opened my book, ready for another quiet day. Then my phone shattered the silence. The screen lit up with a photo I had taken years ago of my older sister, Dominique. Just seeing her name made my stomach tighten. I hesitated for a moment. We had gone strictly no contact for weeks. I looked at Mama Estelle. She was facing the ocean, lost in her movements. I slid my thumb across the screen to answer, but I did not say a word. Amara, are you there? Dominique's voice was high-pitched and trembling. It was a performance I had heard 1,000 times before. She took a loud, dramatic breath. It is Mom. Oh God. Amara, Mom is gone. I sat up straighter in my chair. My eyes locked onto my mother's back. She was transitioning into the crane pose, perfectly balanced. What are you talking about, Dominique? I kept my voice flat. Even though I knew the truth, hearing the words still sent a chill down my spine. She had a heart attack last night. Dominique wailed. The nurse at Oak Haven called me at 3 in the morning. They tried to save her, Amara, but it was too late. She is gone. I pressed the mute button on my screen so she could not hear the sharp intake of breath I failed to suppress. Oak Haven. That was the state-funded nursing facility Dominique had dumped our mother in 6 months ago. She had forged my signature on the admission papers while I was out of the country on a business trip. She told everyone that Mama Estelle had severe dementia and needed 24-hour care. The truth was, Mama had a mild infection, and Dominique wanted access to Mama's brownstone house in downtown Atlanta. I unmuted the phone. Where is she now? I asked. I need to see the body. You can't, Dominique said quickly. Her crying stopped for a split second before starting up again. It was the infectious disease protocol, Amara. Because of the flu outbreak at the facility, they had to cremate her immediately. It is what she would have wanted. I almost laughed out loud. Mama Estelle was a devout Baptist. She believed in open caskets and 3-day viewings. She had terrified nightmares about fire. There was absolutely no way she would have requested cremation. I pressed the speakerphone button and turned the volume up. Mama Estelle had finished her exercise and was walking toward me, toweling off her face. I signaled for her to stop and listen. So let me get this straight, I said, staring directly at my mother. Mom died last night. She was cremated this morning. And you are just calling me now? I was in shock, Amara. Dominique snapped, her tone shifting from grief to annoyance. Look, I am handling everything. Hunter and I are organizing the repast at the house. The funeral is Friday at Ebenezer Baptist. But honestly, you do not need to come. Mama Estelle froze. She stood 5 feet away from me, clutching the white towel. Her eyes went wide. She leaned in closer to the phone. Why shouldn't I come? I asked. She is my mother too, because she didn't want you there. Dominique's voice turned venomous. In her final moments, she was lucid, Amara. She asked for me. She asked for Hunter. She didn't even mention your name. And there is something else. She left a verbal will with the nursing home director. She left the house and all her assets to me. She said you have your fancy job and your money, so you do not need anything from us. The silence on the patio was deafening. I watched my mother's face crumble. It wasn't sadness. It was the devastating realization that her firstborn child, the daughter she had spoiled and protected her entire life, was not just a liar, but a monster. Dominique was burying an empty casket just to steal a house. I watched a single tear roll down Mama Estelle's cheek. She didn't wipe it away. She just straightened her spine and nodded at me. It was a sharp, decisive nod. The kind of nod she used to give when she was grading papers and found a student cheating. It was permission. I took a deep breath. "Okay, Dominique," I said. "Okay." She sounded surprised. "Just okay. I mean, if that is what Mom wanted." I kept my voice trembling slightly, just enough to feed her ego. "You are right. I have been distant. Maybe I do not deserve to be there." "Exactly." Dominique let out a sigh of relief. "I am glad you are finally being reasonable. I will send you the link to the memorial stream. Do not come to Atlanta, Amara. It will just cause drama, and Hunter is very stressed." I hung up the phone. The screen went black. For a moment, the only sound was the waves crashing against the shore below. Mama Estelle sat down in the chair opposite me. She placed her hands on the glass table. Her fingers were trembling again, but this time it was from rage. "She said I was dead," Mama whispered. "She said I left her everything. She thinks you are still in that hellhole." I said, reaching across the table to take her hand. "She hasn't visited you once in 4 months, Mama. If I hadn't come back early from London and moved you out of there that night, you might actually be dead." I remembered the night I broke her out of Oak Haven, the smell of urine and bleach, the way my mother looked sitting in a wheelchair in the corner, sedated and confused. Dominique had told the staff to keep her heavily medicated. It took a court order and 3 lawyers to get her out that night. We vanished the next day. I wanted to give Mama time to heal before we fought back. I just never expected Dominique to escalate it to murder. Even if it was just murder on paper, she is going to sell the house. Mama said, her voice hardening. "That house has been in our family for 3 generations. Your grandmother bought that brownstone with money she saved cleaning floors. She is not going to sell it." I said, standing up. I picked up my iPad and opened my secure email server. "Because she doesn't own it." "I am going to the funeral, Amara," Mama said, looking up at me. I smiled. The sadness in my chest was being replaced by a cold, familiar sensation. It was the feeling I got right before I destroyed a CEO for embezzlement. "Oh, we are definitely going to the funeral," I said, dialing my lawyer's number. "But we are not going as mourners." "Hello, Amara." My lawyer David answered on the first ring. "David," I said, my eyes fixed on the horizon. "Book the jet. We are going to Atlanta. Dominique just declared Mom dead and claimed sole inheritance." There was a pause on the line. Then I heard the sound of typing. "That is fraud, Amara. Massive fraud." "I know," I said. "She is holding a funeral on Friday. She is expecting a grieving sister, or better yet, an absent one. What she is going to get is a forensic audit of her entire life. I want you to pull everything, David. Her credit cards, Hunter's business loans, the nursing home records, and find out who signed the death certificate." "Consider it done," David said. "And Amara, be careful. If she is desperate enough to fake a death, she is desperate enough to do anything." I looked at my mother. She had picked up her tea again, but her eyes were focused on something far away. She looked like a general preparing for war. "I am not afraid of her," I told David. "She is playing checkers. I have been playing chess since I was 12. I hung up and looked at the calendar on my phone. Tuesday. The funeral was Friday. That gave me 72 hours. 72 hours to build a case. 72 hours to let Dominique dig her own grave. She wanted a funeral. I was going to give her one, but it wasn't going to be for our mother. It was going to be for her reputation. Pack your bags, Mama, I said, walking back into the villa. We have a resurrection to attend. The humidity in Atlanta hit me the moment I stepped out of the airport terminal. It was thick and heavy, sticking to my skin like a bad memory. I had left my mother safe in a boutique hotel in Buckhead under a false name with strict instructions not to open the door for anyone. Now I was driving a nondescript black rental sedan through the streets of my childhood. The city had changed. The corner store where I used to buy penny candy was now a sleek coffee shop selling $7 lattes. The beauty salon where the neighborhood women gathered to gossip was replaced by a hot yoga studio. Gentrification had clawed its way through the historic West End, erasing history one brick at a time. But as I turned onto Abernathy Street, I realized the biggest erasure was happening right at my own front door. I parked 3 houses down from the family brownstone. I kept the engine running and the tinted windows rolled up. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. There it was, the house my grandfather had bought with cash in the 60s. The house where I learned to walk. And right there on the manicured front lawn was a wooden sign that made my blood run cold. Sale pending. I felt a wave of nausea. Mom had been legally dead for less than 12 hours according to Dominique's timeline, and the house was already under contract. It was impossible. Unless, of course, the deal had been done weeks ago. I watched from the shadows of my car as a white moving truck backed into the driveway. This wasn't a professional moving company. It was 2 guys in t-shirts throwing furniture into the back of a beat-up van. Then I saw him. Hunter. My brother-in-law was standing on the porch holding a clipboard. He was wearing a polo shirt and khaki shorts, looking more like he was hosting a barbecue than mourning his mother-in-law. He pointed at the door, snapping his fingers at the movers. I watched as they hauled out the mahogany dining table. My heart stopped. That table was an antique from the 1920s. Mom loved that table. She used to polish it every Sunday before church, telling us stories about the ancestors who had sat around it. Hunter was selling it like it was scrapwood. I reached for my phone, my instinct to call the police flaring up. But I stopped myself. The police would ask for proof of ownership. Dominique had the power of attorney. If I intervened now, I would blow my cover. I needed to let them dig their hole deeper. I needed to see just how greedy they could get. I opened Instagram on my phone. A notification popped up immediately. Dominique was live. I clicked on her profile. The video feed showed her sitting in what looked like her living room, but I recognized the curtains. She was in Mom's master bedroom. She was wearing a black veil, tears streaming down her perfectly made-up face. "Thank you so much to everyone sending prayers," she whispered into the camera, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. "This is the hardest day of my life." Mom went so fast. We were not prepared for the costs. The cremation, the memorial service, the legal fees. It is overwhelming. If you can find it in your heart to help us give Mama Estelle the send-off she deserves, the link is in my bio. I minimized the video and clicked the link. It was a GoFundMe page titled "Rest in Power, Mama Estelle." The goal was $50,000. In just 6 hours, they had already raised $15,000. Comments were flooding in from church members, old students of Moms, and neighbors. They were donating $50, $100, pouring out their hearts and their wallets for a lie. I pulled my laptop out of my bag and tethered it to my phone's hotspot. It was time to go to work. I ran a quick trace on the donation link. Usually these funds go into a holding account or are directed to a verified bank account associated with the cause. I bypassed the front-end interface and dug into the metadata of the connected payout account. It took me 3 minutes to find the routing number. I recognized the bank. It was a private credit union where Dominique had her personal accounts. But I didn't stop there. I cross-referenced the account activity with public credit headers. The account linked to the GoFundMe wasn't a savings account for funeral expenses. It was directly tied to a high-interest credit line for a Neiman Marcus store card. I stared at the screen. She wasn't raising money to bury our mother. She was raising money to pay off her designer handbag debt. She was using the sympathy of our community to fund her lifestyle while claiming she had cremated our mother to save money. The level of sociopathy was breathtaking. I took screenshots of everything: the live stream, the donation page, the back-end code linking to her credit card, and the current balance of $15,000. This was wire fraud. This was theft by deception, and it was going to be Exhibit A. I closed my laptop and put the car in gear. I had seen enough at the house. Watching Hunter sell our history for pennies was physically painful, but I had a more important meeting. I drove toward the downtown district, weaving through the afternoon traffic, until I reached a small, dimly lit jazz cafe on Edgewood Avenue. It was the kind of place where business was conducted in the back booths, away from prying eyes. I spotted him immediately. Reynolds was an old-school private investigator I had worked with on several fraud cases. He was sitting in the corner nursing a black coffee. He didn't smile when I sat down. He just slid a thick manila envelope across the scratched wooden table. "You are not going to like what is in there, Amara," he said, his voice low and gravelly. I didn't open it immediately. "Tell me," I said. "I went to Oak Haven." Reynolds began. "I spoke to the night nurse. She was scared to talk, but $50 and a promise of anonymity goes a long way. She confirmed that your sister was the one who authorized the transfer of your mother to the palliative care wing 6 months ago. But that is not the worst part." He tapped the envelope. I pulled out the document on top. It was a do not resuscitate order, a DNR. It stated that in the event of cardiac arrest or respiratory failure, no life-saving measures were to be taken. The date on the document was from 4 months ago, just days before I had rescued Mom. "Look at the signature," Reynolds said. I looked. At the bottom of the page in shaky blue ink was the name Estelle Vance. To the untrained eye, it looked like an elderly person's handwriting. But I wasn't an untrained eye. I was a forensic accountant. I spent my life analyzing handwriting samples to catch forgers. The loop on the E was too wide, the slant of the V was too sharp, and the pressure points on the paper were inconsistent with someone who had tremors, which Mom did at the time. This was a tracing. Someone had placed a document with Mom's real signature over this one and traced it, but they had pressed too hard in the wrong places. "It is a forgery," I whispered, my blood boiling. "It is a bad forgery," Reynolds corrected. "But it was good enough for the nursing home administration. Dominique didn't just put her in there to rot, Amara. She set it up so that if your mother so much as coughed too hard, the doctors would stand back and let her die. This was passive euthanasia for profit." I flipped through the rest of the file. There were photos of Hunter meeting with the facility director in the parking lot. There were bank statements showing small cash withdrawals from Mom's pension account that matched the dates of those meetings. They had been bleeding her dry while waiting for her to die. I looked up at Reynolds. "Does anyone else know about this?" "Just us," he said. "And now you." I put the documents back in the envelope and slid it into my leather tote bag. "This changes everything," I said. "I thought this was just about the house. I thought they were just greedy. But they tried to kill her." "Technically," Reynolds said, leaning back, "since she is alive, it is attempted manslaughter, conspiracy, and insurance fraud. If you walk into a police station right now, you can have them arrested by dinner time." I shook my head. "No. Arresting them is too easy. They will get bail. They will hire lawyers. They will spin a story about how they were just trying to do what was best for a sick old woman. I need to destroy their credibility first. I need to make sure that when the handcuffs go on, there is not a single person in Atlanta who feels sorry for them." Reynolds smirked. "You have a plan for the funeral?" Then I stood up, smoothing down my blazer. The image of the sale pending sign and the fake DNR order burned in my mind. "Oh, I have a plan," I said. "Dominique wants a show. She wants to be the grieving daughter in the spotlight. I am going to give her the performance of a lifetime." I left a $50 bill on the table and walked out into the blinding Atlanta sun. The funeral was in 2 days. I had the financial evidence. I had the medical evidence. Now I just needed the star witness. I got back into my car and drove toward the hotel. It was time to show Mama Estelle exactly how much her life was worth to her favorite daughter. The resurrection was coming, and Judgment Day was coming with it. The Friday morning sun beat down on the red brick facade of Ebenezer Baptist Church. It was the kind of humid Atlanta heat that made your clothes stick to your skin the moment you stepped outside. This church was a local institution. It was where my mother, Mama Estelle, had led the choir for 20 years. Her soprano voice used to shake the stained glass windows during the Easter service. Today, however, the church was silent, except for the low hum of expensive cars pulling into the parking lot. I watched from my rental car as the community arrived. They wore their Sunday best. The women were in wide-brimmed hats and dark dresses, clutching Bibles and handkerchiefs. The men wore dark suits and solemn expressions. And standing at the top of the wide stone steps greeting everyone like a grieving celebrity was my sister, Dominique. She looked like she had stepped out of a fashion magazine editorial about widowhood. She was wearing a black silk dress that I knew for a fact cost $3,000 because I had seen the charge on Mom's stolen credit card statement. A sheer veil covered her face, but not enough to hide the diamond earrings glinting in the sunlight. Hunter stood next to her, shaking hands and accepting condolences with the practiced somberness of a man closing a business deal. I took a deep breath and checked my purse. Inside, I had a single pen. It looked like a standard black ballpoint, the kind you buy in bulk at an office supply store. In reality, it was a specialized tool I used for marking temporary evidence. The ink was designed to vanish completely upon contact with heat, or after exactly 1 hour of exposure to air. It was a petty trick, perhaps, but dealing with Dominique required petty measures. I stepped out of the car. The gravel crunched loudly under my heels. As I walked toward the church steps, the chatter stopped. It rippled through the crowd like a wave. Heads turned. Whispers started behind gloved hands. I kept my head high, my face a mask of calm. I was walking into the lion's den, but the lions didn't know I had brought a whip. Dominique spotted me when I was halfway up the stairs. Her posture stiffened. She said something to Hunter, who immediately crossed his arms and stepped forward to block my path. But Dominique was faster. She rushed down 3 steps to meet me, positioning herself so that she was physically looking down on me. "You have some nerve showing up here," she hissed, her voice loud enough to carry to the gathering crowd. "I just want to pay my respects, Dominique," I said calmly. "Respects?" She laughed, a harsh, jagged sound. "You didn't respect her when she was alive. You left her to rot in that nursing home. You were too busy with your fancy life in the city to answer the phone when she was dying. And now you want to come here and play the grieving daughter." The crowd murmured their agreement. I looked past her shoulder and saw Mrs. Patterson, the head of the church deacons. She was shaking her head at me, her face pinched with disapproval. Dominique had done her work well. She had painted me as the villain, the heartless career woman who abandoned her sick mother. "Please," I said, raising my voice slightly so the crowd could hear. "I just want to see her one last time. I want to see the urn." Dominique crossed her arms. Her eyes darted around, checking her audience. She saw that she had the upper hand. She saw the judgment in the eyes of the elders. This emboldened her. She reached into Hunter's jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of legal paper. "You want inside?" she asked. "You want to sit in the front row and pretend you cared? Fine. But there is a condition." She thrust the paper at me. It was a waiver. A crudely written legal document stating that I, Amara Vance, voluntarily waived all rights to contest the distribution of Estelle Vance's estate and acknowledged Dominique Vance as the sole beneficiary and executor. It was blackmail, plain and simple. Sign away your inheritance or be barred from your mother's funeral. "Sign it," Dominique demanded. "Sign it, and you can go in. Don't sign it, and Hunter will have security remove you for trespassing. This is a private event, Amara." I looked at the paper. Then I looked at the crowd. They were watching intently, waiting to see if I would choose money or my mother. If I refused to sign, Dominique would spin it as proof that I only cared about the inheritance. If I signed, she won the house, or at least she thought she did. I looked at Mrs. Patterson. "Mrs. Patterson," I said, "is this what Mama would have wanted sisters fighting on the church steps?" Mrs. Patterson adjusted her hat. "Your sister is the one who took care of her Amara. She has a right to protect the estate. You should just sign it if you are really here for God." The betrayal stung, but I pushed it down. "Fine." I turned back to Dominique. "Give me the pen." I reached into my bag and pulled out my own pen before she could offer hers. "Actually, I have one." Hunter stepped forward and held the clipboard steady. His eyes were greedy, fixated on the paper. He was probably already calculating how much the house would sell for. I uncapped my pen. I pressed the tip to the paper. I felt the eyes of the entire congregation on my hand. I wrote my name in clear, sweeping cursive. Amara Vance. There I said, capping the pen and handing the clipboard back to Hunter. "Are you happy?" Dominique snatched the clipboard from Hunter. She stared at the signature, a triumphant smirk spreading across her face under the veil. She looked like she had just won the lottery. "Smart choice," she whispered. "Now get inside and sit down. And do not say a word. If you cause a scene, I will have you dragged out." She stepped aside. The crowd parted for me, but the warmth was gone. I felt their cold shoulders as I walked through the heavy oak doors into the sanctuary. The inside of the church was cool and smelled of lilies and old hymnals. The organist was playing a soft, mournful prelude. At the front of the church, surrounded by an obscene amount of white roses, sat a golden urn. It was polished to a high shine, sitting on a velvet pedestal where a casket should have been. I walked down the center aisle. My footsteps echoed in the high ceilings. I didn't stop at the back. I walked all the way to the front row, the pew reserved for immediate family. I sat down directly in front of the urn. I stared at the golden vessel. It was beautiful. It was dignified. And it was completely full of lies. I wondered what was actually inside it. Wood ash from her fireplace? Sand from a playground? Or maybe the cremated remains of a shelter cat? Knowing Dominique, she probably just bought the urn empty and didn't bother filling it at all. The pews behind me began to fill up. I could hear the rustling of dresses and the murmurs of sympathy as people took their seats. Dominique and Hunter made their grand entrance a moment later. Dominique threw herself onto the pew next to me, making a show of being too weak to stand. Hunter put a supportive arm around her, patting her shoulder. "She is in a better place now," Hunter whispered loud enough for the people behind us to hear. I looked at the urn. I thought about the signature on the clipboard outside. In 59 minutes, that ink would begin to fade. By the time they got home to scan the document, the paper would be blank. But that wasn't the only surprise waiting for them. I looked at my watch. It was 10:55. The service was scheduled to start at 11. Mama Estelle and the security team I had hired were currently parked in a tinted SUV around the back of the church waiting for my signal. Dominique leaned over to me, her voice dropping to a vicious whisper. "Do not think you are getting a dime, Amara. I am going to sell the house next week. Hunter already has a buyer. You can go back to your lonely apartment and rot." I turned to look at her. Her eyes were dry. Her makeup was perfect. There wasn't a shred of grief in her, just calculation. I smiled at her. It was a small, tight smile. "You know, Dominique," I said softly, "Mom always said you were a terrible liar." She frowned. "What is that supposed to mean?" "It means," I said, turning back to face the altar, "you should really check the contents of that urn before you pray over it." The organ music swelled, signaling the start of the service. The pastor stepped up to the pulpit. Dominique glared at me, confused and angry, but she couldn't say anything now. The show had begun. And she had no idea that she wasn't the director anymore. She was just another actor in a play I had written, and her final curtain call was approaching fast. I folded my hands in my lap and waited for the resurrection. Dominique stood at the pulpit looking like a tragic heroine from a black and white movie. She gripped the sides of the wooden podium with her manicured hands and leaned into the microphone. A single tear which I suspected she had induced with a hidden onion slice or a pinch of salt rolled perfectly down her cheek. The church was dead silent. Every eye was fixed on her. She was not just burying our mother. She was cementing her status as the matriarch of the family. My mother was a saint. Dominique whispered, her voice cracking with practiced emotion. She was the light of my life. And in her final moments, when the pain was too much for her tired heart, she held my hand. She looked at me, and she said, "Dominique, promise me you will keep the family together. Promise me you will take care of the house." She told me that she wanted me to have the deed not for the money, but to preserve our history. Hunter stood a few feet behind her, his head bowed in somber agreement. He nodded slowly, as if he had been there to witness this fictional deathbed confession. From the pews, I heard sniffles and murmurs of amen. They were buying it. They were swallowing every toxic spoonful of her lie. Dominique took a shaky breath and continued, "I know my sister Amara is here today, and I want to say in front of God and everyone that I forgive her. I forgive her for not being there. I forgive her for the distance. Mom left the house to me because she knew I was the one who stayed. She knew I was the one who cared, and I intend to honor that legacy." She wiped her eyes and stepped down from the pulpit. Hunter rushed to her side, offering her his arm as if she were made of fragile glass. The congregation let out a collective sigh of sympathy. Patterson, sitting 2 rows back, leaned forward and patted Dominique's hand as she passed. The pastor stood up and adjusted his glasses. "We will now hear from the younger daughter, Amara." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. I stood up. The wooden pew creaked beneath me. I could feel the hostility radiating from the crowd. To them, I was the cold, heartless career woman who had abandoned the saintly mother and the devoted sister. I walked toward the pulpit. My heels clicked rhythmically on the hardwood floor. Click, click, click. It sounded like a countdown. I stepped up to the microphone. I did not cry. I did not tremble. I looked down at Dominique in the front row. She was dabbing her eyes with a lace handkerchief, but behind the cloth I saw her watching me. Her eyes were hard and warning. She was daring me to make a scene. She was daring me to contradict her story about the will. I looked at the golden urn sitting on the velvet table. It gleamed under the church lights. "Thank you, Dominique, for those moving words," I said, my voice clear and steady. "It is comforting to hear about Mom's final moments. It is amazing, really. Because usually when someone dies of a massive heart attack in a nursing home, they are unconscious. But Mom was apparently lucid enough to discuss real estate law. That is a miracle." A ripple of unease went through the room. Dominique stiffened. Hunter shifted his weight from one foot to the other. "You said she was cremated this morning," I continued, gripping the microphone. "You said the ashes in this urn are all that is left of Estelle Vance. You told this congregation that she is gone forever, and that her last wish was for you to inherit a $2 million brownstone." I paused. I let the silence stretch until it was uncomfortable. "But there is a problem with your story, Dominique." I leaned forward, my eyes locking onto hers. "The problem is that the dead do not usually drink tea. The dead do not usually complain about the Atlanta traffic. And most importantly, the dead do not usually stand outside the church doors waiting to call their children liars." Dominique dropped her handkerchief. "What are you talking about?" she hissed, half standing up. I pointed a finger toward the massive double doors at the back of the sanctuary. "I think you should ask her yourself." I nodded to the security team I had positioned at the entrance. On my signal, the heavy oak doors groaned and swung open. The bright midday sunlight flooded into the dim church, blinding everyone for a second. As eyes adjusted to the glare, a silhouette stepped forward. It was not a ghost. It was not a spirit. It was Mama Estelle. She was not wearing black. She was wearing a pristine, tailored white suit that cost more than Hunter's car. She held a gold-handled cane in one hand, not because she needed it, but because it looked regal. Flanking her on either side were two massive private security guards in dark suits. For 3 seconds there was absolute silence. It was the kind of silence where you could hear a heartbreak. Then chaos erupted. "Lord have mercy," someone screamed from the balcony. A woman in the third row fainted, sliding off the pew with a dull thud. People jumped to their feet. Bibles were dropped. The organist, in his shock, slammed his hands down on the keys, producing a discordant, terrifying chord that echoed through the rafters. "It is a ghost!" Mrs. Patterson shrieked, clutching her pearls. "It is the spirit of Estelle, Mama." Estelle did not float. She walked. She walked down the center aisle with a stride that was strong and furious. The crowd parted like the Red Sea. People pressed themselves against the edges of the pews, terrified to touch her. Dominique did not scream. She froze. Her face went from a look of annoyance to a mask of pure, unadulterated terror. The blood drained from her skin so fast she looked gray. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish on dry land, but no sound came out. Hunter looked like he was about to vomit. He looked at the back exit, then at the security guards, calculating his odds of escape. He realized they were 0. Mama Estelle reached the front of the church. She stopped right in front of the golden urn. She looked at it with disgust, then she raised her cane and knocked it off the table. The urn hit the floor with a loud metallic clang. It popped open. There was no ash inside, just a bag of play sand from a hardware store. It spilled out across the red carpet, gritty and beige. The church went silent again, staring at the sand. Mama Dominique squeaked. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Mama, is that you?" Mama turned to look at her. The look on her face was not one of a loving mother. It was the look of a judge delivering a death sentence. "Who else would it be?" Dominique Mama's voice boomed without a microphone. "Did you think a cheap cremation and a bag of sand would be enough to get rid of me?" Dominique's knees gave out. She didn't faint gracefully like in the movies. She collapsed into a heap of expensive silk and shame on the floor. She grabbed the hem of Mama's white pants. "Mama, I thought you were dead. The nursing home called me. I swear." "Liar." Mama pulled her leg away as if Dominique were a poisonous snake. "You forged the DNR, you forged the will, and for the last 6 months you have been praying for me to die so you could sell my house to buy more purses." A collective gasp sucked the air out of the room. The congregation turned on a dime. The sympathy for Dominique evaporated, instantly replaced by horror and outrage. "And you?" Mama turned her gaze to Hunter. Hunter held up his hands, backing away. "Mrs. Vance, I didn't know. Dominique told me." "Shut up," Mama snapped. "You sold my dining room table yesterday. I want it back, and I want the money you stole from my pension fund." Mama walked up the steps to the pulpit. I stepped aside, handing her the microphone. She looked out at the sea of shocked faces. These were her friends, her neighbors, people she had known for 40 years. "I apologize for the disruption," Mama said, her voice steady and commanding. "But it seems my daughter decided to hold my funeral a few decades too early. There will be no burial today. There will be no repast. And there will certainly be no inheritance." She pointed the cane at Dominique, who was sobbing uncontrollably on the floor, her mascara running in black streaks down her face. "This show is over, Dominique. But before you leave, you are going to open your phone. You are going to refund every single dollar you stole from these good people on that GoFundMe page, right now. Or I will let Amara call the police officers waiting in the parking lot." The crowd erupted. The shock turned to anger. People began shouting at Dominique, "Give us our money back! Shame on you, you wicked girl!" I stood next to my mother and watched. I looked at Hunter, who was trying to blend into the shadows. I looked at Dominique, broken and humiliated on the floor. And then I looked at the empty urn lying in the spilled sand. I took a deep breath. The air in the church no longer smelled of lilies. It smelled of justice. and it was the sweetest thing I had ever smelled. The chaos inside the church spilled out into the parking lot like a shaken soda bottle exploding. The congregation followed us, smartphones raised high, recording every second of the family drama. I stood on the pavement next to Mama Estelle, my hand resting protectively on her arm. The adrenaline from the confrontation was still coursing through my veins. I thought we had won. I thought the sight of our mother alive and furious was the checkmate move that would end Dominique and Hunter's reign of terror. I was wrong. I had underestimated the sheer desperation of a man with nothing left to lose. Hunter did not run. He did not beg for forgiveness. Instead, he wiped the sweat from his forehead, straightened his expensive suit jacket, and did something that chilled me to the bone. He started screaming. "Officer! Officer, help us! She has her! She has my mother-in-law!" He ran toward the two police officers I had called to the scene. These were officers from the Atlanta Police Department, looking confused as they tried to make sense of the shouting mob. Hunter threw himself at them, pointing a shaking finger at me. "Arrest her. That woman kidnapped Estelle Vance from a secure medical facility. She is dangerous." I stepped forward, shielding Mama. "Excuse me, officer," I said, keeping my voice calm. "I am Amara Vance. This is my mother." "We are not. She is brainwashed," Hunter screamed over me, his face turning a theatrical shade of red. "Look at her. She does not know where she is. She thinks she is at a wedding. She thinks she is buying a house. My mother-in-law has severe stage 4 dementia. She was declared legally incapacitated 6 months ago." Mama Estelle bristled. "I do not have dementia, you lying sack of C." Hunter interrupted her, grabbing the officer's arm. "Aggression, confusion, paranoia. These are classic symptoms. She needs her medication. If she does not get her heart medication and her antipsychotics within the hour, she could die. That woman took her off her meds to manipulate her into signing checks." The crowd gasped. The narrative was shifting in real time. Suddenly, I wasn't the hero who brought Mom back. I was the estranged daughter who had dragged a sick, confused old woman out of her deathbed to stage a scene. Officer Miller, a tall man with a tired face, stepped toward us. "Ma'am," he said to me, "is this true? Did you remove Mrs. Vance from a medical facility?" "I removed her because they were killing her," I said, my voice rising. "And she is not incapacitated. She is perfectly lucid." "I have the paperwork right here," Hunter shouted. He reached into his briefcase, which he had surprisingly kept with him during the service. He pulled out a thick file marked with the logo of Oak Haven Nursing Center. He thrust it into Officer Miller's hands. "Look. Signed by Dr. Evans, the chief neurologist. Estelle Vance lacks the capacity to make medical or financial decisions. I have the medical power of attorney. My wife, Dominique, is her legal guardian. What Amara has done here is kidnapping and elder abuse." I watched Officer Miller flip through the pages. I knew exactly what he was seeing. Falsified cognitive tests. Fake logs of violent outbursts. A fabricated history of a woman losing her mind. It was a masterpiece of fiction created by a corrupt doctor and paid for with my mother's own money. "Officer," I said, trying to keep the panic out of my voice, "that file is a forgery. If you let me call my lawyer—" "We don't have time for lawyers," Hunter yelled. "Look at her eyes. She is about to have a stroke. We need to get her to the hospital now." Mama Estelle gripped my arm tighter. "I am not going anywhere with you, Hunter." The officer looked at the paperwork, then at Mom, then at me. In the eyes of the law, the paper held more weight than the person standing in front of him. The document said Mom was a danger to herself. The document said Hunter was in charge. "I am sorry, ma'am," Officer Miller said to me, his hand moving to his belt. "I have to follow the court order. If Mrs. Vance is under legal guardianship, you have no right to transport her." He signaled to his partner. "Call an ambulance. We need a transport for a psych evaluation. And get adult protective services on the line." "No," I shouted, stepping between the officer and my mother. "You are not taking her. That is what they want. They want to drug her again so she can't testify." "Ma'am, step back," the officer warned. Amara, don't, Mama whispered, sensing the escalation. But it was too late. Hunter saw his opening. He lunged forward, grabbing Mom's other arm. Come on, Mama Estelle, it is okay. The bad dreams are over. Get your hands off me. Mama swung her cane, hitting Hunter squarely in the shin. He howled in pain, hopping on one foot. See, he screamed. Violent, she is violent. She is a danger to the public. That was the nail in the coffin. To the police, a senior citizen hitting someone with a cane wasn't self-defense. It was proof of the dementia diagnosis Hunter had just handed them. Officer Miller grabbed my wrists. Amara Vance, you are under arrest for interference with custody and suspected elder abuse. I felt the cold steel of the handcuffs click around my wrists. The world seemed to slow down. I saw Dominique standing by the church doors, watching through her veil. She wasn't crying anymore. She was smiling. A small, terrifying smile. They had flipped the board. They had turned their greatest defeat into a tactical victory. I watched helplessly as two paramedics led Mama Estelle away. She was shouting my name, trying to fight them off, but they were gentle and firm. They treated her like a confused child. It is okay, sweetie, one paramedic said to her. We are going to get you some juice and a nice warm blanket. I am not crazy, Mama screamed as they loaded her into the back of the ambulance. I am rich, and I am going to sue all of you. Sadly, shouting that you are rich and going to sue everyone is exactly what a crazy person would say. The doors slammed shut, cutting off her voice. The siren wailed a long, mournful sound that tore through the parking lot. Hunter stood by the police cruiser, rubbing his leg. He looked at me through the window as they shoved me into the back seat. He leaned in close, his breath fogging up the glass. You should have stayed in London, Amara, he mouthed. You really should have stayed away. I sat in the back of the police car, the hard plastic seat digging into my back. The humiliation burned hotter than the Atlanta sun. I could see the neighbors shaking their heads. I could hear the whispers. Look at that. Poor Dominique. Her sister really is unstable. Kidnapping her own mother. Shameful. As the car pulled away, taking me to the precinct, my panic began to fade, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. Hunter had made a mistake. A massive, fatal mistake. By having me arrested, he had made this a matter of public record. By handing that file to the police, he had entered a forged document into evidence. He thought he was sending me to jail. What he didn't realize was that he had just handed me the jurisdiction I needed. He played the dementia card. It was a strong move, I admitted to myself. It neutralized Mom's testimony for the next 24 hours. It bought him time to drain the accounts or flee the country. But he forgot who I was. I wasn't just an angry daughter. I was a forensic accountant who specialized in medical fraud. I closed my eyes and leaned my head against the cage. Let them book me. Let them take my fingerprints. Let them put me in a holding cell. The moment my lawyer walked through those doors with the real MRI scans from the Boston specialists, the police department would have a very different problem on their hands. I sat in the interrogation room an hour later. It was a small, windowless box that smelled of stale coffee and desperation. My wrist was handcuffed to the metal table. Most people would be crying. Most people would be begging for a phone call. I was just sitting there, counting the seconds. The door opened. Officer Miller walked in, looking less confident than he had in the parking lot. He threw a notepad on the table. Your sister and her husband are filing emergency restraining orders, he said. They claim you have been manipulating your mother's finances. They say you forced her to sign checks while she was mentally incompetent. I looked at him. I didn't blink. Officer Miller, I said softly. Do you know what a forensic audit is? He frowned. What? It is what I do for a living. I explained. It means I track every penny. I track every signature. And most importantly, I track every lie. I leaned forward as far as the chain would allow. You have the medical file Hunter gave you. It is evidence, he said. Good, I said. Do not lose it. Because on page 14 there is a signature from Dr. Evans dated October 12th. So I smiled. On October 12th, Dr. Evans was in Cabo San Lucas. I know this because I have his credit card statements. I know he bought a $3,000 bottle of tequila at a club called El Squid Row at the exact moment he supposedly signed my mother's competency evaluation in Atlanta. Officer Miller stopped writing. He looked at me, really looked at me for the first time. "You are holding a forged document, officer," I said. "And you just facilitated the kidnapping of a sane woman by the people who are embezzling her estate. Now, I would like to call my lawyer. His name is David, and he is currently standing in the lobby with a federal judge on the phone." The color drained from Officer Miller's face. He stood up slowly and backed out of the room. I sat back in the metal chair. Hunter thought he had checkmated me. He didn't realize he had just sacrificed his queen. The gaslighting was over. The autopsy of their crime was about to begin. The fluorescent lights of the hospital waiting room hummed with a low, irritating buzz that seemed to drill directly into my skull. It had been 72 hours since the police dragged my mother away from her own funeral. 72 hours of sitting on uncomfortable plastic chairs, drinking vending machine coffee, and watching my sister Dominique and her husband Hunter pretend to be concerned guardians. They sat across the room whispering to each other and casting pitying glances in my direction. They looked confident. They had the police report. They had the falsified medical records from Oak Haven. In their minds, they had already won. They thought this mandatory psychiatric evaluation was just a formality before they could lock Mama Estelle away in a memory care unit and liquidate her assets. I checked my watch. It was 2 in the afternoon. The independent court-appointed psychiatrist, Dr. Thorne, had been in the evaluation room with my mother for over an hour. Hunter smirked at me. He stood up and walked over, smoothing his silk tie. He looked like a man who was about to close a deal on a used car. "You know, Amara," he said, his voice dripping with fake sympathy, "we can still handle this quietly. If you agree to sign the guardianship transfer, we can ask the judge to be lenient with you regarding the kidnapping charges. We are family, after all. We do not want to see you go to jail." I looked up from my iPad. I did not blink. "I am not going to jail, Hunter," I said calmly. "And neither is Mama. But I cannot say the same for your friend Dr. Evans." Hunter's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "Who, Dr. Evans?" I repeated. "The medical director of Oak Haven. The man who signed the affidavit claiming Mama has stage 4 dementia. I assume he is the one you are banking on today." Hunter laughed, but it sounded forced. "Dr. Evans is a respected medical professional. His diagnosis is unimpeachable." At that moment, the heavy double doors opened. Thorne stepped out. He was a stern man with graying hair and a no-nonsense demeanor. He held a thick clipboard in his hands. Dominique rushed forward, her heels clicking loudly on the linoleum floor. "Doctor," she said, clutching her pearls. "How is she? Is she confused? Does she know who we are? We just want to get her back to the facility so she can rest." Dr. Thorne looked at Dominique over the rim of his glasses. Then he looked at Hunter. Finally, his eyes landed on me. "Ms. Vance," Dr. Thorne said to me, "you provided a secondary medical file to my office this morning. Is that correct?" "Yes, sir," I said, standing up. Hunter interjected immediately. "Objection. Excuse me, doctor. But Amara is not the legal guardian. Any medical records she has are likely fabricated or outdated. The official records are from Oak Haven." Dr. Thorne held up a hand to silence him. "I have reviewed the Oak Haven records, Mr. Sterling. They describe a patient with advanced cognitive decline, unable to recognize family members or perform basic tasks." "Exactly," Hunter said, nodding vigorously. "It is a tragedy." However, Dr. Thorne continued, his voice sharpening. "I also reviewed the digital file Ms. Zamara submitted. It contains MRI scans, CT scans, and a full neurological workup dated from last month. These tests were conducted at Massachusetts General Hospital in Boston by Dr. Eris Thorne. No relation, but he is the leading neurologist in the country." I stepped forward. When I took Mama to Martha's Vineyard, we didn't just go for a vacation. I took her to see the best specialists in the world. I wanted to prove that the decline she experienced at Oak Haven was not natural. It was induced. Induced? Dominique squeaked. What are you talking about? Dr. Thorne turned the clipboard around to face them. The scans from Boston show a brain that is remarkably healthy for a 65-year-old woman. There is no plaque buildup consistent with Alzheimer's. There is no shrinkage consistent with dementia. In my hour-long interview with Mrs. Vance just now, she was able to recall the birth dates of all her grandchildren, the current stock price of Coca-Cola, and the exact details of how you two put her in that home against her will. That is impossible, Hunter stammered, sweat beginning to bead on his forehead. She is crazy. She attacked me. She attacked you because you were kidnapping her, Dr. Thorne said coldly. Mrs. Vance is fully capacitated. In fact, she is sharper than most people half her age. Which leads me to a very serious question. How did Dr. Evans at Oak Haven diagnose a healthy woman with terminal dementia? I walked over to the table and placed my iPad down. I tapped the screen, bringing up a spreadsheet I had compiled the night before. I can answer that, I said. I think it has something to do with this. I pointed to a highlighted line on the screen. This is a bank transfer from a shell company called HS Realty Holdings, I explained. HS stands for Hunter Sterling. On the 15th of every month for the last 6 months, a transfer of $5,000 was made to a private account in the Cayman Islands. So what? Hunter sneered. I do business internationally. Yes, I said, but I traced the beneficiary of that account. It belongs to a corporation registered to Dr. Marcus Evans. You were paying him $5,000 a month to keep Mama sedated and to falsify her medical records. The silence in the waiting room was absolute. Dominique stared at her husband with horror. You paid him, she whispered. You told me the doctor said she was dying. He lied to you too, Dominique, I said, though I felt no pity for her. He needed her incapacitated so he could liquidate the brownstone. He was paying the doctor to turn our mother into a vegetable. Hunter lunged for the iPad. That is illegal. You hacked my accounts. I snatched the device away. I'm a forensic accountant, Hunter. I didn't hack anything. I just followed the public breadcrumbs you were too stupid to sweep up. And I wasn't the only one interested in this transaction. As if on cue, the elevator doors at the end of the hall chimed. 2 uniformed officers and a man in a cheap suit walked out. I recognized the detective immediately. Hunter Sterling, the detective asked. Hunter backed away, his back hitting the vending machine. Who are you, Detective Miller, Fraud Division? We just picked up Dr. Evans at his office. He was very eager to cut a deal. He says you instructed him to administer heavy sedatives to Mrs. Estelle Vance to simulate cognitive decline. No, Hunter shouted, looking around for an exit. That is a lie. He is lying to save himself. We have the wire transfers, Mr. Sterling, the detective said, pulling out a pair of handcuffs. And we have the statement from the nursing staff. You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit medical fraud, elder abuse, and bribery. I watched as they spun Hunter around and slammed him against the soda machine. The click of the handcuffs was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. Dominique stood frozen in the middle of the room. She looked at her husband being read his rights, and then she looked at me. Amara, she whimpered. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know about the money. I looked at her cold and unyielding. You knew she wasn't sick, Dominique. You knew she was just sad and lonely after Dad died. And you let him put her away because you wanted the house. You are just as guilty. The detective led Hunter away. He was screaming about calling his lawyer. Dominique sank into a chair, burying her face in her hands. Dr. Thorne cleared his throat. Ms. Vance, I am immediately lifting the psychiatric hold on your mother. I am also filing a report with the court recommending the immediate revocation of Dominique Vance's guardianship. Thank you, doctor, I said. Can I see her? She is waiting for you, he said, smiling for the first time. She is a remarkable woman. She gave me a recipe for peach cobbler while we were waiting for the police. I walked into the evaluation room. Mama Estelle was sitting on the edge of the examination table, swinging her legs. She was still wearing her white suit from the funeral, though it was a little wrinkled now. When she saw me, her face lit up. "Did they get him?" she asked. "They got him, Mama," I said, wrapping my arms around her. "And Dominique?" "She is in the hallway," I said. "She is claiming ignorance." Mama sighed and pulled back to look at me. "Ignorance is not a defense, Amara, not when it comes to family." We walked out of the room arm in arm. Dominique was still sitting in the chair, sobbing. When she saw Mama, she stood up, reaching out a hand. "Mama," she choked out. "Please." Mama Estelle didn't stop walking. She didn't even look at her. She stared straight ahead, her chin high, her grip on her cane firm. "Call a taxi," Dominique, Mama said, her voice echoing in the sterile hallway. "And do not come to my house. The locks are being changed within the hour." We walked through the automatic doors into the bright afternoon sun. The air tasted sweet. We had won the battle for her freedom, but the war for the estate was just entering its final phase. I checked my phone. I had one more stop to make. The bank was about to close and I had a foreclosure to intercept. "Are you hungry, Mama?" I asked as we walked toward my rental car. "Starving," she said. "Being dead really works up an appetite. But let's make it quick, Amara. We have a house to save." I opened the car door for her. The medical record war was over, the financial war was about to begin, and I had the ultimate weapon sitting right in the passenger seat. The leather chairs in David's office were soft and smelled of old money and stability. It was the kind of room designed to make you feel safe. The walls were lined with mahogany bookshelves filled with legal precedents that stretched back 100 years. From the 25th floor window, the chaos of the streets below looked manageable. Small. Insignificant. For a brief moment, I allowed myself to relax. We had just walked out of the hospital with a clean bill of health. We had the police report. We had the medical fraud evidence. I turned to look at Mama Estelle. She was sipping a cup of herbal tea, her hand resting on the gold handle of her cane. She looked tired, but victorious. The nightmare of the nursing home was over. Then David walked in. He was not smiling. David had been our family attorney for 15 years. He was a man who wore three-piece suits and had a poker face that could bankrupt a casino. But today his face was pale. He held a thick stack of documents in his hands, and his knuckles were white from gripping them too hard. He didn't sit down behind his massive oak desk. He stood in front of us looking like a doctor about to deliver a terminal diagnosis. "I thought we were done with the bad news, David," I said, setting my coffee cup down on the coaster. The silence in the room suddenly felt heavy, suffocating. So did I. "Amara," David said, his voice grave. "We handled the medical guardianship. We handled the kidnapping charges. But while you were fighting to get your mother out of Oakhaven, Dominique was busy doing something else." He slid the documents across the polished table. On top was a letter with a bright red header. The words were bold and aggressive. "Notice of default. Foreclosure proceedings imminent." I picked up the paper. My forensic accountant brain automatically scanned for the numbers before I even processed the words. $450,000. The number jumped out at me. "What is this?" I asked, my voice staying calm despite the sudden racing of my heart. "The brownstone is paid off. Grandpa bought it with cash in 1965. There is no mortgage." "There wasn't a mortgage," David corrected, "until 6 months ago." Mama Estelle leaned forward, her hand trembling slightly. "What did she do?" "David, tell me." David took a deep breath. 2 weeks after she placed you in Oakhaven, Dominique used the durable power of attorney she had coerced you into signing. She applied for a reverse mortgage on the property. A reverse mortgage. I felt the blood drain from my face. It was the oldest trick in the predatory lending book. It allows homeowners to borrow against the equity of their home, receiving the money as a lump sum. Usually, the loan doesn't have to be paid back until the homeowner dies or sells the house. She took out $450,000 of equity, David continued. She took it as a cash lump sum. She told the bank it was for home improvements and medical care. We know now that the money went to Hunter's shell companies and her own debts. But that is fraud, I said, flipping through the pages. We can prove she signed it under false pretenses. We can sue the bank for not doing due diligence. We can, David said. And we will. But that takes time. Civil fraud cases take years, Amara. And we do not have years. We do not even have months. He reached over and tapped a paragraph in the fine print of the loan agreement. It was Clause 4B, the occupancy clause. Read this, David said. I read it out loud. The full balance of the loan becomes immediately due and payable if the borrower ceases to use the property as their primary residence for a period exceeding 6 consecutive months. I stopped reading. The room spun. 6 months. Dominique put Mama in the nursing home exactly 6 months and 3 days ago, I whispered. David nodded grimly. The bank sent an inspector to the house last week. They found it empty. They found the sale pending sign. They flagged the property as abandoned. Because Estelle has not slept in that house for 6 months, the terms of the loan have been violated. The bank has called the note. They want the full $450,000 back. And if we do not pay? Mama asked, her voice small. They will foreclose, David said softly. They have already initiated the proceedings. We have 30 days to pay the full balance, or they will auction the house on the courthouse steps to recover their loss. 30 days. I looked at the paperwork. Dominique had timed it perfectly. Or maybe she was just lucky in her cruelty. She had extracted the cash, spent it, and now the house was going to be swallowed up by the bank because of the very exile she had forced upon our mother. Just then my phone rang. I looked at the screen. It was an unknown number, but I knew who it was. I could feel it. I answered and put it on speaker. Hello, sister. Dominique's voice was slurred. She sounded like she had been drinking or crying or both. She was out on bail. Hunter was still in jail, but Dominique had managed to scrape together the 10% for her bond. You are going to lose the house, Amara, she said, letting out a jagged, hysterical laugh. I just got the email from the bank. Did you read the occupancy clause? I bet you did. You read everything. You stole $500,000 from your own mother, I said, my voice shaking with rage. You destroyed her credit. You destroyed her legacy. I needed that money. Dominique screamed, her voice cracking. Hunter said it was a sure thing. We were going to pay it back before she died. But you had to come back. You had to play the hero. Well, congratulations. You saved her. But you can't save the house. Mama Estelle leaned toward the phone. Her voice was steel. You are no daughter of mine, Dominique. Dominique laughed again, but this time it sounded like a sob. Fine, disown me. Send me to prison. I do not care anymore. But if I can't have that house, nobody can. It is gone, Mama. It is over. I spent the money. Hunter spent the money. The bank is going to take it, and you will be out on the street just like me. She hung up. The line went dead. The silence that followed was heavy with grief. Mama Estelle looked at me. Her eyes filled with tears. My father built that house, she whispered. He worked 2 jobs. He laid the bricks for the patio himself. It is the only thing I have to leave to you. I stood up and walked to the window. I looked out at the Atlanta skyline. I had money. I was a successful professional. But $450,000 in cash liquid in 30 days. That was a stretch even for me. My assets were tied up in investments and my own property in London. Liquidating them would take time and incur massive penalties. I turned back to the desk. I wasn't ready to give up. I picked up the foreclosure notice again. I needed to see the enemy. I needed to know exactly who we were fighting. The original loan was with Southern Trust Bank. They were a regional lender known for aggressive tactics. But as I scanned the document looking for the payoff address, something caught my eye. It was a small line of text at the very bottom of the last page in the assignment section. Banks rarely keep bad debt. When a loan goes into default, or even when it looks risky, they package it and sell it to secondary markets. They sell it to debt buyers for pennies on the dollar just to get it off their books. I squinted at the text. Pursuant to the assignment of debt dated yesterday, the servicing rights and ownership of this note have been transferred from Southern Trust Bank to a secondary holding company. I read the name of the company. Then I read it again. My heart stopped beating for a second and then it started again double time. A smile slow and dangerous spread across my face. "David," I said, my voice vibrating with a sudden intense energy. "Look at the assignee." David put on his reading glasses. He leaned over the paper. "The debt has been sold to Phoenix Asset Management LLC, Delaware." He looked up at me confused. "It is just a debt buyer, Amara. These companies are sharks. They are worse than the banks. They will never negotiate. They buy the debt to foreclose and flip the property for a profit. This makes it harder, not easier." I laughed. It was a loud, genuine laugh that startled Mama Estelle. "No, David," I said. "It makes it perfect." I walked over to my bag and pulled out my laptop. I opened it and logged into my secure work server. I typed in the name Phoenix Asset Management LLC. "You see, David?" I said, typing furiously. "In my line of work, I track shell companies. I track where the bad money goes. And last year, I did a forensic audit on a massive conglomerate that buys distressed mortgage debt. I turned the laptop screen around so they could see. Phoenix Asset Management is a subsidiary. It is a shell company used to acquire assets anonymously." So Mama asked, "What does that mean?" "It means," I said, pointing to the screen, "I know who owns Phoenix Asset Management. It is not a bank. It is not a hedge fund." I looked at David, my eyes gleaming. "It is a private holding company owned by the Sterling Family Trust." David's jaw dropped. "Sterling? As in Hunter?" "Sterling. No," I said. "As in Hunter's father. Big Daddy Sterling. The patriarch. The man who disowned Hunter 10 years ago for being a thief and a liar." I sat back in the leather chair. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place. The universe, or maybe just the predictable nature of greed, had handed me a weapon. "Hunter's father hates bad publicity," I said. "He hates scandal. And he definitely hates his family name being dragged through the mud. If he finds out that his son committed fraud to trigger a foreclosure that his own company just bought, he will want to bury it." David finished, a smile finally touching his lips. I picked up my phone. I didn't need 30 days. I didn't need $450,000. "David, get me the number for the Sterling family office in Boston," I said. I think it is time I introduced myself to my brother-in-law's father. I have a feeling he will be very interested to hear how his son tried to steal a house that his own company now accidentally owns. Mama Estelle looked at me. "Amara, what are you going to do?" "I am going to make a deal, Mama," I said. "The bank thinks they sold a bad debt. They have no idea they just sold me the key to our freedom." I stood up and smoothed my blazer. The foreclosure notice lay on the desk, no longer a death sentence, but a map to buried treasure. Dominique thought she had burned the house down. She didn't realize that from the ashes a phoenix was about to rise. And this phoenix was going to eat her alive. My home office looked more like the control center of a space station than a room in a condo. 6 high-definition monitors formed a semicircle around my desk, each one displaying a different slice of the financial universe. The air conditioner hummed in the background, keeping the server rack in the closet cool. This was my sanctuary. This was where I performed my surgeries. I did not use a scalpel or a laser. I used algorithms and forensic software to cut through layers of lies until I found the ugly truth hidden underneath. I took a sip of cold brew coffee and cracked my knuckles. It was 3 in the morning. Mama Estelle was asleep in the guest bedroom, exhausted from the day's revelations. But I was wide awake. The foreclosure notice was sitting on the corner of my desk, a physical reminder of the ticking clock. 30 days. We had 30 days to come up with nearly $500,000. But if my hunch was right, I would not need to pay a dime. I just needed to prove where the money went. I pulled up the bank records for the joint account shared by Dominique and Hunter. It was a mess. Their spending habits were manic: designer clothes, leasing payments for luxury cars they could not afford, and five-star dinners. But I was not interested in the small stuff. I was hunting for the whale. I found the deposit from Southern Trust Bank dated 6 months ago. $450,000. It hit their account on a Tuesday morning. By Wednesday afternoon, it was gone. Standard money laundering involves 3 stages: placement, layering, and integration. Hunter had skipped integration and went straight to panic mode. He had wired the entire amount in a single lump sum to a company called Prestige Global Holdings. I typed the name into my database. It sounded impressive, like a multinational conglomerate. In reality, it was a shell company registered in Nevada with a mailing address that led to a UPS store in a strip mall outside of Las Vegas. I dug deeper. Who owned Prestige Global Holdings? The paperwork listed a registered agent, a lawyer known for setting up anonymous corporations for shady clients. But I had a backdoor. I had access to a proprietary database used by forensic auditors to track cross-border transactions. I ran a query on the tax identification number. It linked Prestige Global Holdings to another entity, Caribbean Blue Investments, registered in the Cayman Islands. I leaned back in my chair. The Cayman Islands. It was a cliché for a reason. It was where people went to hide money they did not want the IRS or their wives to know about. I traced the wire transfer. The $450,000 traveled from Atlanta to Nevada and then jumped the border to the Caymans. Most people would hit a wall here. The banking secrecy laws in the Caymans are legendary. But Hunter was not a mastermind. He was a desperate man making sloppy mistakes. I looked at the transaction history for Caribbean Blue Investments. It wasn't a savings account. It was a clearinghouse. Money came in from various sources, always in large round numbers. 50,000, 100,000. And then days later, money went out to different individuals. I started running background checks on the people receiving the money. The first name was a dentist in Buckhead. The second was a retired teacher in Florida. The third was a small business owner in Texas. I pulled up their social media profiles. They all had one thing in common: they were all connected to Hunter Sterling on LinkedIn, and they were all angry. The dentist had posted a furious rant 6 months ago about being scammed by a fake investment opportunity. The picture became clear. Hunter was not an investment guru. He was running a Ponzi scheme. He was taking money from new investors to pay off the old ones who were demanding their returns. The $450,000 he stole from Mama Estelle did not go into a secret savings account. It evaporated. He used it to pay off the dentist and the teacher, to keep them from going to the police. He had burned our family home to put out a fire of his own making. I felt a surge of cold anger. He had not just stolen from us. He had used our mother's legacy to cover up his crimes against other innocent people. But proving the flow of money was only half the battle. I needed to prove intent. I needed to prove that Hunter personally authorized that wire transfer. He could easily claim that Dominique did it, or that his account was hacked. I needed to put the gun in his hand. I opened the metadata log for the bank transfer. Every digital transaction leaves a fingerprint. It records the time, the browser type, and most importantly, the IP address of the device that initiated the command. I scanned the log. The transfer was authorized on October 15th at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. The device was a MacBook Pro. I looked at the IP address, 192. That was a local network address. I needed the external public IP. I scrolled down. There it was. A string of numbers that looked like nonsense to most people, but looked like coordinates to me. I ran a geolocation trace on the IP. The blue dot on the map zoomed in. It hovered over North America, then Georgia, then Atlanta. then the West End district. It landed directly on top of 422 Abernathy Street. My mother's house. I froze. I checked the date again. October 15th. That was a Tuesday. I checked my timeline. That was 2 weeks after they had put Mama in the nursing home. Hunter had been in the house. He was sitting in my mother's living room, probably with his feet up on the coffee table. He had used her own Wi-Fi network to log into his bank account and steal the equity from the roof over his head. The sheer audacity was breathtaking. He was so arrogant, so sure that Mama would never come home, that he didn't even bother to use a VPN. He didn't bother to go to a coffee shop. He committed a federal crime from the scene of the crime. I took a screenshot. Then I printed it. This was the smoking gun. This single piece of paper proved that Hunter Sterling was physically present at the location when the funds were stolen. It proved he used interstate wires to facilitate fraud. I wasn't just looking at theft anymore. I was looking at wire fraud, money laundering, and because he used the proceeds to pay off investors in other states, it was racketeering. I sat back and watched the printer churn out the evidence. The pages were warm to the touch. I picked up my phone and dialed David's personal cell number, even though it was the middle of the night. "Pick up David," I whispered. He answered on the fourth ring, his voice groggy with sleep. "Amara, is everything okay? Wake up, David," I said, my eyes glued to the screen where Hunter's financial life was laid bare. "I need you to draft a new complaint, and I need you to call your contact at the FBI." "The FBI?" David asked, suddenly alert. "Why?" "Because I said pinning the IP trace log to my corkboard next to Hunter's photo. I just found out where the money went. Hunter is running a Ponzi scheme, and I have proof that he used Mama's internet connection to launder nearly $500,000 through the Cayman Islands." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then I heard the rustle of bed sheets and the sound of feet hitting the floor. "Do not move," David said. "I am coming over. Print everything." I hung up the phone. I looked at the monitors glowing in the dark room. Hunter thought he was a player. He thought he could outsmart a senile old woman and her absent daughter. He forgot one thing. The numbers never lie. And neither do IP addresses. I walked over to the window and looked out at the sleeping city. Somewhere out there, Hunter was sitting in a holding cell, probably thinking about how to talk his way out of the medical fraud charges. He had no idea that a tsunami was coming. I turned back to my desk. I wasn't done yet. I had the crime. Now I needed to secure the asset. I typed in one more search query. Sterling Family Trust. Board of Directors. A list of names popped up. At the very top was William Sterling Sr., the patriarch, the man who owned Phoenix Asset Management. I smiled. It was time to make a phone call that would ruin a family reunion. Hunter had used my mother to save himself. Now I was going to use his father to bury him. The steakhouse was dimly lit and smelled of aged beef and expensive cologne. It was the kind of place where Atlanta's power players came to make deals and hide their sins. Hunter sat in a corner booth, a glass of scotch in one hand, and the thigh of a woman who was definitely not my sister in the other. She was young, maybe 22, with long braids and a dress that cost more than my first car. Hunter looked relaxed, laughing at something she whispered, completely unaware that his life was about to implode. I walked through the dining room. I didn't rush. I moved with the silent precision of a predator who had already cornered its prey. The hostess tried to stop me, asking if I had a reservation. I just held up a platinum card and kept walking. When I reached the booth, I didn't say a word. I just pulled out the chair opposite Hunter and sat down. Hunter froze. The glass of scotch stopped halfway to his mouth. The girl looked at me confused, then at Hunter. "Who is this?" she asked, her voice dripping with annoyance. Hunter lowered the glass slowly. His face went pale, the artificial tan suddenly looking sallow under the warm pendant lights. "Amara," he stammered. "What are you doing here?" I looked at the girl. You should leave, I said softly. Unless you want to be named as a co-conspirator in a federal RICO case. Her eyes went wide. She grabbed her clutch and slid out of the booth without a backward glance. Hunter watched her go, then turned his glare on me. You are ruining my life, Amara, he hissed. First the police, now this. I am out on bail. I am trying to relax. Relaxing on my mother's money, I asked, picking up the menu and glancing at it. Or are you spending the money from the dentist in Buckhead? Or maybe the teacher in Florida? Hunter stiffened. How do you know about that? I know everything, Hunter. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the white tablecloth. I know about the Ponzi scheme. I know about the Cayman accounts. And I know about the $450,000 you stole from the house. But that is not why I am here. I pulled a thin file folder from my bag and slid it across the table. Hunter stared at it. What is this? I opened it for him. It was a single sheet of paper. A list of names. But these weren't investors. These were the names of the people Hunter had borrowed money from to cover his losses when the scheme started to crack. Dangerous people. People who didn't file lawsuits when they didn't get paid. They filed missing persons reports. You owe the Petrovic brothers $50,000, I recited without looking at the paper. You owe a loan shark in Miami another $80. And payment is due on Friday. Hunter's hand started to shake. He knocked a scotch glass, spilling amber liquid onto the pristine tablecloth. How did you? I bought your debt. Hunter. I lied. It was a calculated bluff. I hadn't bought it yet, but I knew enough to make him believe I controlled his fate. I own you. I continued, my voice low and cold. I can make a phone call and have those debts extended. Or I can make a phone call and tell them exactly where you are sitting right now. Hunter looked around the restaurant, suddenly terrified. He wiped the sweat from his upper lip. What do you want? He whispered. Money. I do not have any left. I do not want your money, Hunter. I want Dominique. He blinked. Dominique. But she is your sister. She is my enemy, I corrected. And right now she is the only thing standing between me and saving my mother's house. I know she has a plan. I know she kept something back. I want access to her personal files. I want to know what she was planning to do if the nursing home didn't kill Mama fast enough. Hunter hesitated. He looked down at his hands. If I tell you, she goes to jail for a long time. I shrugged. And if you do not tell me, you deal with the Petrovic brothers. It is a simple choice, Hunter. Loyalty to a wife you are already cheating on, or your own survival. He didn't even take 5 seconds to decide. The self-preservation instinct in a narcissist is faster than a blinking eye. Her laptop, he said, his voice trembling. The silver MacBook. She keeps it in the safe in the closet. The password is her birthday followed by the word Queen. And I pressed, what is on it? Hunter looked sick. He took a gulp of the spilled scotch from the bottom of the glass. There is a folder called Plan B, he whispered. She was researching dosages, digoxin, insulin, things that cause heart failure but look natural. She was going to switch Mama's meds once we got her back home. She ordered the drugs from an online pharmacy in Mexico. The confirmation emails are in that folder. I felt a chill run through my body that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. Attempted murder. Conspiracy to commit homicide. It wasn't just greed. It was evil. Pure distilled evil. You knew, I asked. I told her it was crazy. Hunter pleaded, his eyes wet with fear. I told her we should just wait. But she was impatient. She said the market was crashing and we needed the cash now. I didn't help her with that part, Amara. I swear. I just wanted the money. I didn't want to kill anyone. I stood up. The disgust I felt for the man sitting in front of me was overwhelming. He was a thief, a liar, and a coward. He was willing to let his wife murder her mother for a payout, and now he was selling her out to save his own skin. Thank you, Hunter, I said, picking up my bag. Wait. He grabbed my wrist. The debt. You said you would buy the debt. You said I would be safe. I looked down at his hand until he let go. I said I could buy the debt, I replied. I didn't say I would. His face crumbled. You promised. Consider it a lesson in contract law, I said, turning away. Always read the fine print. I walked out of the restaurant. The night air was thick and humid. I walked around the corner to where my car was parked. I sat in the driver's seat and pulled a small black device from my pocket. It was a digital voice recorder. The red light was still blinking. I pressed stop. Then I pressed play. I heard Hunter's voice clear as a bell. There is a folder called Plan B. She was researching dosages. She was going to switch Mama's meds. I had him. I had them both. Hunter thought he had bought his freedom with a password. Instead, he had just confessed to being an accessory to conspiracy to commit murder. He had provided the roadmap to the evidence that would put Dominique away for life, and his confession would ensure he went down right beside her. I started the car. The engine purred to life. I had the password. I had the confession. Now I just needed to get to that laptop before Dominique realized her husband had just stabbed her in the back. The alliance of monsters had fallen apart just as I knew it would. Evil always eats itself when it gets hungry enough, and tonight I was going to serve them their last meal. I merged onto the highway heading toward the one place Dominique thought was safe, her home, or as she would soon find out, the crime scene. The foreclosure auction was held in a windowless conference room at the downtown Marriott. It was a depressing place that smelled of stale donuts and aggressive capitalism. This was where dreams went to die and where vultures came to feast. Investors in cheap suits sat in rows checking their phones, waiting to buy family homes for pennies on the dollar. I stood in the back of the room wearing a baseball cap and oversized sunglasses. I was not there to bid. I had hired a proxy for that. I was there to watch my sister play her final hand. Dominique walked in 5 minutes before the gavel fell. She looked exhausted. Her designer dress was wrinkled, and she was wearing sunglasses indoors to hide her swollen eyes. But there was a manic energy about her. She was clutching a certified bank check. I knew exactly how much was on that check. It was the last of the money she had siphoned from the accounts before I froze them. It was her getaway fund, her survival money, and she was about to bet it all on spite. She sat in the front row. She wanted to look the auctioneer in the eye. She wanted to feel powerful again. She had convinced herself that if she could buy the debt, she could kick Mama out. She could still win the war even if she had lost every battle. The auctioneer cleared his throat. He was a bored man who had sold 1,000 broken lives. Item number 42, he droned into the microphone. A residential property located at 422 Abernathy Street. Historic brownstone. 3 stories. We are auctioning the non-performing note secured by the property. Opening bid is set at $300,000. Dominique's hand shot up. 300, she shouted. The auctioneer nodded. I have 300. Do I hear 325? A man in a gray suit 2 rows back raised his paddle. 325. Dominique whipped her head around to glare at him. 350, she barked. I watched her closely. She was shaking. She was terrified, but her hatred for me and Mama was fueling her. She would rather burn every cent she had than let us live in peace. 375, the man in gray said calmly. Dominique hesitated. I knew her limit was 400,000. That was everything. If she went over that, she would be penniless. 400,000, she screamed, her voice cracking. The room went silent. The other investors looked at her. They were there for a bargain, not a fight. 400,000 was close to market value for the debt. It was a risky buy. Going once at 400,000, the auctioneer said. Going twice. Dominique smirked. She sat back in her chair, crossing her arms. She thought she had done it. She thought she had bought the power to evict her own mother. 450,000, a voice said from the back corner. Dominique spun around. It was my lawyer, David. He was standing casually against the wall holding a paddle with the number 777 on it. He wasn't bidding as himself, he was bidding on behalf of a corporate entity. Dominic stood up. "Who are you?" she demanded. The auctioneer banged his gavel on the podium. "Order. The bid is with the gentleman in the back at 450,000. Do I hear 475? Dominique looked at her check. She looked at David. She looked at the auctioneer. She opened her mouth to bid, but no sound came out. She didn't have the money. The math had finally defeated her. Going once, the auctioneer chanted. Going twice. Sold to bidder number 707, representing Phoenix Asset Management, LLC. The gavel hit the wood with a final decisive crack. It was over. Dominique kicked the chair in front of her. She gathered her bag and stormed toward the exit. She had to pass David to leave. She stopped in front of him, her face twisted into a mask of pure venom. "Congratulations," she spat at him. "You just bought a money pit. The plumbing is old and the roof leaks. But hey, at least my mother and sister will be on the street." David didn't say anything. He just pointed to the side door where the paperwork was being processed. "I do not care who you are," Dominique continued, her voice rising. "As long as Amara didn't get it, I am happy. I hope you evict them tomorrow. I hope you bulldoze it." She was laughing now, a cruel, hysterical sound. She thought she had achieved a moral victory. She thought she had lost the house to a stranger, which in her twisted mind was better than losing it to family. Actually, a voice said from behind David, "We are not planning to evict anyone." Dominique froze. She knew that voice. She turned around slowly. I took off my sunglasses and stepped out from behind the pillar. "Hello, sister," I said. Dominique looked from me to David and then to the paperwork on the table. The color drained from her face. "You," she whispered. "You are Phoenix Asset Management." I walked over to the table and picked up the pen. "Phoenix," I said, signing my name on the purchase agreement. "The mythical bird that rises from the ashes. It seemed appropriate given that you tried to burn our lives to the ground." "No," Dominique shook her head, backing away. "You can't afford this. You do not have $500,000 cash." "I didn't use my cash," I said, handing the pen back to the clerk. "I used leverage. I used the evidence of Hunter's fraud to negotiate a deal with his father. Mr. Sterling financed the purchase of the debt to keep his family name out of the press." I stepped closer to her. "So in a way, Dominique," I said, smiling, "you paid for this. Your greed and your husband's stupidity bought Mama her house back." Dominique looked like she was going to be sick. The realization hit her like a physical blow. She hadn't just lost. She had handed me the ultimate victory. "So you own the debt?" she asked, her voice trembling. I nodded. "I own the debt. I own the mortgage. And effective immediately, I am the landlord." I looked at the security guard standing by the door. "This woman is trespassing on private property," I said calmly. "Please escort her out." Dominique started to scream as the guard took her arm. "It is not fair. It is my inheritance." I watched them drag her out of the conference room. She was kicking and screaming just like a toddler who had been told no for the first time in her life. David handed me the deed. "It is done," he said. I looked at the paper. It was just a standard legal document, but it felt heavier than gold. It was the shield that would protect Mama Estelle for the rest of her life. "Let's go home, David," I said, putting the deed in my bag. "Mama is making peach cobbler, and I think we finally have something to celebrate." I walked out of the hotel into the bright Atlanta sunshine. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Hunter. He was asking if I had spoken to the Petrovic brothers yet. I deleted the message. I had bigger things to worry about. I had a house to renovate and a life to rebuild. The revenge was sweet, but the peace that followed was even sweeter. I got into my car and drove toward the West End. For the first time in 6 months, the sale pending sign would be coming down, and it would stay down forever. The morning sun hit the red bricks of the brownstone on Abernathy Street, but it brought no warmth to the people hiding inside. For the last 3 days, Dominique and Hunter had been living like fugitives in the house they tried to steal. They had sold their own luxury condo in Buckhead a week ago, thinking they would move into Mama Estelle's historic home and live rent-free forever. They had gambled everything on the assumption that Mama would never leave the nursing home. Now they were trapped. They had no money, they had no assets, and thanks to the foreclosure notice they had ignored, they had no legal right to be there. I sat in my car across the street watching the front door. I sipped my coffee, feeling a sense of calm that scared me a little. Revenge used to feel hot like fire, but now it felt cold like steel. Beside me on the passenger seat was the writ of possession, signed by a judge less than 24 hours ago. It was the legal hammer that was about to shatter my sister's delusion. I checked my watch. It was 9 o'clock exactly. Right on cue, a white van pulled up to the curb. Two uniformed deputies from the Fulton County Sheriff's Department stepped out. They were big men with serious faces and utility belts that jingled as they walked. Behind them came a team of 4 movers I had hired. They were not the gentle kind who wrap your china in bubble wrap. They were the eviction crew. They carried heavy-duty trash bags and moved with the efficiency of a demolition team. I stepped out of the car and signaled to the lead deputy. He nodded at me. We walked up the driveway together. The grass was overgrown. The flowers Mama loved were dead. In just 6 months, Dominique had managed to let the exterior decay, just like she had let her own soul rot. The deputy pounded on the heavy oak door. His fist made a sound that echoed through the entire neighborhood. "Sheriff's Department," he shouted. "Open up!" There was no answer. I could hear movement inside. I heard a frantic shuffling and a hushed argument. They were ignoring us, hoping we would just go away. It was the logic of a child hiding under the covers. The deputy hit the door again, harder this time. "Dominique and Hunter Sterling," he yelled. "We have a court order for immediate eviction. Open this door or we will breach it." Finally, the lock clicked. The door opened a crack. Dominique peered out. She looked terrible. Her hair was unwashed, tied back in a messy knot. She was wearing a silk robe that had a coffee stain on the lapel. Her eyes were darting back and forth, looking for an escape route that didn't exist. "What do you want?" she hissed. "We are sleeping. You can't just bang on people's doors like this." The deputy didn't blink. He held up the paperwork. "Ma'am, you were served with a notice to vacate 30 days ago. That period has expired. The property has been foreclosed and sold to a new owner. You have 10 minutes to gather your essential personal items and leave the premises." Dominique laughed, a high-pitched sound that bordered on hysteria. "Sold. That is impossible. This is my mother's house. I am the heir. You can't sell it without my signature. There has been a mistake. Go check your records." "There is no mistake," the deputy said, stepping forward. He used his shoulder to gently but firmly push the door open. "The bank foreclosed on the reverse mortgage, ma'am. The debt was purchased and the title has been transferred. You are trespassing." Dominique tried to block him with her body. "No, I am not going anywhere. This is my house. My name is on the will." She looked past the deputy and saw me standing on the bottom step. Her eyes went wide with rage. "You!" she screamed, pointing a shaking finger at me. "You did this. You told them to come here." I walked up the stairs until I was standing face to face with her. I could smell the stale alcohol on her breath. "I didn't tell them to come here, Dominique," I said, my voice steady. "I hired them." "What?" she whispered. I pulled the deed out of my bag. It was the document I had signed at the auction. "I told you at the hotel," I said. "I own the debt, which means I own the foreclosure rights. And since you refused to pay the $450,000 you stole, I am exercising my right as the new property owner." I looked at the movers and nodded toward the door. "Clear it out," I said. "Everything that doesn't belong to Estelle Vance goes on the curb." Dominique screamed as the movers pushed past her. They marched into the living room and started grabbing things. They didn't care about her expensive taste. They grabbed her designer throw pillows and tossed them onto the lawn. They picked up boxes of Hunter's expensive sneakers and carried them out like garbage. Stop it, Dominique shrieked, running after a mover who was carrying her jewelry box. That is Cartier. You can't touch that. The deputy held her back. Ma'am, step outside. Do not interfere with the eviction process or I will arrest you for obstruction. I walked into the house. It smelled of neglect. There were pizza boxes piled on Mama's antique dining table. There were empty wine bottles rolling on the floor. It broke my heart to see the sanctuary of my childhood treated like a frat house. I walked to the kitchen. I expected to see Hunter fighting for his property. I expected to see him yelling at the police or trying to negotiate a deal. But the kitchen was empty. The back door was wide open, swinging gently in the breeze. I walked to the window and looked out into the alleyway. I saw a figure sprinting away carrying a heavy duffel bag. It was Hunter. He wasn't trying to save his wife. He wasn't trying to save their marriage. He had grabbed the cash he had hidden in the freezer and his collection of Rolex watches, and he was running for his life. I turned back to the living room. Dominique was fighting with a mover over a fur coat. "Let go," she screamed. "My husband will sue you, Hunter. Hunter, get down here." I stood in the hallway and cleared my throat. "He can't hear you, Dominique," I said. She froze, clutching the fur coat to her chest. What I pointed to the open back door. "He is gone," I said. "I just saw him running down the alley. He took the duffel bag. You know, the one he keeps the emergency cash in." Dominique looked at the door. Then she looked at me. The realization hit her slowly. She ran to the kitchen. I heard her scream Hunter's name. It was a raw, animalistic sound of betrayal. She ran out the back door into the yard, but the alley was empty. He had left her. He had left her to face the police, the eviction, and the poverty all by herself. She walked back into the house. She looked smaller now. The fight had drained out of her. The deputies escorted her out the front door. She stood on the sidewalk, surrounded by piles of her clothes and boxes of useless trinkets. The neighbors were watching from their porches. They weren't judging her anymore. They just looked tired. I walked out onto the porch and looked down at her. She was sitting on a Louis Vuitton suitcase, her head in her hands. "You have nowhere to go, do you?" I asked. She looked up at me. Her mascara was running down her face. "I hate you," she whispered. "You took everything from me." "I didn't take anything, Dominique." I said. "You threw it away. You threw away a mother who loved you. You threw away a sister who would have done anything for you. And for what? For a husband who just ran out the back door with your life savings?" I motioned to the movers to stop. The lawn looked like a yard sale gone wrong. I turned to the deputy. "How long does she have to remove these items from the property?" 24 hours, the deputy said. "After that, it is considered abandoned property, and you can dispose of it however you see fit." I looked at Dominique. "You have 24 hours, I said. I suggest you start selling things. You are going to need the money for a divorce lawyer." I walked back inside the house and closed the door. The sound of the lock clicking into place was the most final sound in the world. I leaned against the heavy wood and closed my eyes. It was done. The house was ours again. The cancer had been cut out. I walked through the empty rooms. The silence was heavy, but it was clean. I picked up a pizza box from the floor and threw it in the trash. Then I picked up a wine bottle. I started to clean. I cleaned for hours. I scrubbed the floors. I opened the windows to let the fresh air in. I was washing away the stain of their greed. By sunset, the house felt different. It felt lighter. I stood in the living room watching the light fade across the floorboards. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Mama Estelle. "Is it over?" she asked. I took a picture of the empty living room bathed in the golden hour light. I sent it to her with 3 words. "Welcome home, Mama." I looked out the window one last time. Dominique was gone. The pile of clothes was gone. The only thing left on the curb was a single broken picture frame. I walked out to get it. It was a picture of the 3 of us taken 10 years ago at a family barbecue. We were all smiling. We looked happy. I took the photo out of the frame. I looked at Dominique's smiling face. I didn't feel hate anymore. I just felt pity. I tore the photo in half, separating her from us. I put Mama and me in my pocket. I dropped the other half in the trash can. The eviction was complete. Not just of the tenants, but of the toxicity that had plagued us for so long. I walked back up the steps of my house, my home. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't looking over my shoulder. I was looking forward. The Starlight Motel was a decaying scar on the side of the interstate highway just south of the city limits. It was the kind of place where the neon sign buzzed with a dying flicker and the asphalt was stained with years of leaking oil and bad decisions. I sat in my rental car across the street in the parking lot of a 24-hour diner. I watched through binoculars as Hunter Sterling paced back and forth in front of room 12. He looked nothing like the arrogant man who had tried to steal my mother's home. His suit jacket was gone, replaced by a sweat-stained t-shirt. He was nervously smoking a cigarette, taking quick, shallow drags, and constantly checking his watch. I knew exactly what he was waiting for. He was waiting for his Uber to the airport. I also knew he was never going to make that flight. Beside me on the passenger seat, my phone was connected to a secure line with the FBI field office. I had given them the location 10 minutes ago. I had given them the description of the car and the duffel bag full of laundered cash. But I wasn't just there to watch an arrest. I was there to witness the final collision of lies. A yellow taxi pulled into the motel lot, kicking up a cloud of dust. Hunter grabbed his duffel bag and sprinted toward it. But before he could open the door, another car screeched into the lot. It wasn't the police. Not yet. It was Dominique. She jumped out of a rideshare sedan looking wild and desperate. She was still wearing the clothes from the eviction earlier that day, but now they were disheveled and dirty. She ran toward Hunter, screaming his name. "Hunter! You were leaving me! You were going to leave me here!" Hunter froze. He looked at the taxi driver who was watching the scene with bored indifference. Then he looked at his wife. The mask of the loving husband finally slipped off completely. He didn't look guilty. He looked annoyed. "Go home, Dominique," he shouted, pushing her away as she tried to grab his arm. "I do not have time for this. You have my money," Dominique shrieked, clawing at the duffel bag. "That is the equity from the house. That is my half." Hunter shoved her hard. She stumbled back, falling onto the cracked pavement. "It is not your money," he spat. "It is my money. I earned it dealing with your crazy family for 10 years. You are nothing but deadweight, Dominique. You are broke. You have no house. You have no credit. Why would I take you with me?" Dominique looked up at him, her eyes wide with shock. The cruelty of his words hit her harder than the physical shove. "But I did everything you said," she whimpered. "I put Mama in the home. I forged the papers. I betrayed my own sister for you. And look where that got us." Hunter sneered, opening the taxi door. "You were incompetent. You couldn't even keep the old woman in the bed." "Goodbye, Dominique." He threw the bag into the back seat, but before he could climb in, a siren wailed. It wasn't the long, mournful wail of an ambulance. It was the sharp, aggressive chirp of federal law enforcement. 3 black SUVs swarmed the parking lot, blocking the exits. Men in tactical vests poured out, weapons drawn. Federal agents, hands in the air. "Step away from the vehicle." Hunter froze. The color drained from his face, leaving him looking like a wax figure melting in the heat. He raised his hands slowly, the fight draining out of him instantly. The taxi driver threw his hands up, too terrified of being caught in the crossfire. Dominique stayed on the ground staring at the agents. She didn't seem to understand what was happening. She thought this was about the house. She didn't realize she was sitting in the middle of a federal money laundering takedown. I watched from my car as they slammed Hunter against the hood of the taxi. They patted him down roughly. One agent opened the duffel bag. He pulled out stacks of cash wrapped in rubber bands. Then he pulled out a manila envelope. The lead agent opened the envelope. He looked at the contents, then looked at Hunter. "Going somewhere, Mr. Sterling?" the agent asked, his voice carrying across the quiet lot. Hunter didn't answer. The agent held up 2 plane tickets. "One way to Phoenix, Arizona," the agent read. "And I see here you have a companion ticket." Dominique scrambled to her feet. "Phoenix." she asked, hope flickering in her eyes. Are we going to Phoenix? Is that the plan, Hunter? The agent looked at Dominique, then back at the tickets. The ticket is not for you, ma'am, the agent said dryly. It is issued to a Sarah Jenkins, and there is an infant lap ticket for a baby boy named Hunter Jr. The silence that followed was heavier than the humid air. Dominique looked at Hunter. She looked at the tickets. Then she looked back at Hunter. Sarah, she whispered. Who is Sarah Hunter? Closed his eyes. He didn't want to look at her. Who is she? Dominique screamed, launching herself at him. The agents held her back. She is his fiancée, ma'am, the agent said, checking a file. They have a 2-year-old son. He has been paying for their condo in Scottsdale with the funds he embezzled from your mother's estate. I watched Dominique break. It wasn't a crack. It was a shatter. Her knees gave out and she collapsed into the arms of the federal agent. She wailed a sound of pure agony that made the hair on my arms stand up. She had sold her soul. She had tried to kill her mother. She had destroyed her relationship with me. And she had done it all for a man who had a second family and was planning to leave her penniless in a motel parking lot. The betrayal was total. It was absolute. She wasn't the partner in crime she thought she was. She was just another victim of his con, just like the dentist and the teacher. The only difference was that she had given him more than money. She had given him her humanity. The agent cuffed Hunter and shoved him into the back of an SUV. Then he turned to Dominique. Dominique Sterling, he asked. She nodded dumbly, tears streaming down her face. You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, bank fraud, and identity theft, he said, pulling out a second pair of handcuffs. Dominique pulled back. No, wait. I didn't know about the other family. I am a victim here. He tricked me. That may be true regarding the affair, ma'am, the agent said, spinning her around. But your signature is on the loan applications. Your signature is on the falsified nursing home documents. And according to the evidence provided by your sister, you were a willing participant in the scheme to defraud Estelle Vance. You are not a victim, ma'am. You are an accomplice. I heard the click of the handcuffs. It was the final sound of her life falling apart. Dominique looked across the parking lot. For a second, her eyes locked onto my rental car. She couldn't see me through the tinted windows, but she knew I was there. She knew I was watching. She didn't scream at me this time. She didn't curse. She just hung her head in defeat. The reality of her choices crashed down on her. She was going to prison not because she was evil, but because she was weak. She had let a predator convince her that her family was the enemy. I watched them put her in a separate car. She looked small in the back seat. The arrogance was gone. The fashion was gone. All that was left was a woman who had lost everything because she wanted too much. I started my engine. The show was over. The FBI had their man, the bank had their justice, and Mama Estelle had her safety. I pulled out of the diner parking lot and drove past the motel. The flashing lights painted the scene in red and blue. It looked like a tragedy, but to me it looked like closure. I picked up my phone and dialed David. They have them, I said. Both of them, David asked. Both of them, I confirmed. And David, make sure the prosecutor knows about the Phoenix tickets. I want to make sure Dominique knows exactly what she went to jail for. I hung up and merged onto the highway. The sun was setting over Atlanta, casting a warm orange glow over the city. I thought about Mama waiting for me at home. We had a lot of work to do. We had to fix the garden. We had to buy new furniture. But for the first time in years, the foundation of our lives was solid. The termites had been exterminated. I rolled down the window and let the wind hit my face. I didn't smile. I didn't celebrate. I just drove. Sometimes the best revenge isn't what you do to people. It is just letting them be exactly who they are and watching the world react accordingly. Hunter was a thief, so he went to prison. Dominique was a fool, so she went with him. And I was the daughter who stayed, so I went home. It was simple, it was logical. And it was finally over. The Fulton County Superior Court smelled of floor wax and old wood. It was a smell that usually commanded respect, but today it just made me feel nauseous. We were in the final day of the trial. For the past 2 weeks, I had sat in the gallery watching the prosecution dismantle the lives of my sister and her husband. Hunter sat at the defense table looking like a man who had not slept in a month. His expensive suit hung loosely on his frame, and he refused to make eye contact with anyone. Dominique sat on the other side of their lawyer. She had opted for the innocent victim look, wearing a modest cardigan and no makeup, but the hard set of her jaw gave her away. She was not sorry. She was just angry that she had been caught. The prosecutor called Mama Estelle to the stand. The courtroom went silent as she walked to the witness box. She held her head high, gripping her cane not for support but for authority. She declined the bailiff's offer of a hand. When she sat down, she smoothed her skirt and looked directly at the judge. She did not look at Dominique. Not once. Mrs. Vance, the prosecutor, asked gently, "Can you tell the court how you felt when you discovered your daughter had filed a do not resuscitate order in your name?" Mama took a moment to answer. Her voice was low, but it carried to every corner of the room. "I felt like I had failed," she said. "I raised Dominique to be a strong woman. I raised her to value family above everything else. To find out that she viewed my life as nothing more than an obstacle to a paycheck broke my heart in a way that no heart attack ever could." Dominique let out a sob. It was a loud, theatrical sound designed to garner sympathy from the jury. "I am sorry, Mama," she cried out. "Hunter made me do it. He said we would lose everything." The judge banged his gavel. "Order. The defendant will remain silent." Dominique slumped back in her chair, burying her face in her hands. Her lawyer whispered something urgent to her, but she shook her head, pointing an accusing finger at Hunter. "He manipulated me," she hissed loud enough for the microphone to catch. "I was a victim of coercive control. It was a good strategy. If the jury believed she was just a helpless wife under the spell of a wicked husband, she might get off with probation. But I had prepared for this moment. I was the next witness. I took the stand with my laptop tucked under my arm. I connected it to the courtroom's projection system. "Ms. Vance," the prosecutor said, "you are a forensic accountant, is that correct?" "Yes," I said. "I specialize in tracing illicit financial flows." "And what did you find when you examined your sister's finances?" I looked at Dominique. She was watching me with pleading eyes, silently begging me to back up her story. I looked away and pressed a key on my laptop. A complex timeline appeared on the large screen facing the jury. "This chart represents the financial history of Dominique and Hunter Sterling," I explained. "The defense is claiming that Hunter was the mastermind, and Dominique was an unwilling participant who only agreed to the fraud 6 months ago under duress." I pointed to a series of red bars on the far left of the timeline. However, the data tells a different story. These red bars represent withdrawals from my mother's retirement accounts. They began 5 years ago. The jury leaned forward. Dominique went pale. 5 years ago, I continued, my voice steady. Hunter and Dominique were not yet married. In fact, they had not even met. Yet on these dates, checks were written from Estelle Vance's account to a shell company called DV Consulting. DV stands for Dominique Vance. I pulled up the images of the cashed checks. "These signatures were forged," I said. "We know this because on the dates these checks were signed, my mother was visiting me in London. Dominique was the only one with access to the checkbook. She has been stealing from our mother systematically for half a decade. Hunter didn't corrupt her. He just gave her a bigger shovel to dig the hole she was already standing in." The courtroom erupted in whispers. The victim narrative evaporated instantly. Dominique wasn't a pawn. She was the architect. Hunter was just the partner she had been waiting for. Dominique stared at the screen. The evidence was irrefutable. The dates, the amounts, the signatures. It was all there in black and white. She sank lower in her chair, realizing that her own greed had left a paper trail that no amount of tears could wash away. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. When they returned, they did not look at the defendants. We find the defendant, Hunter Sterling, guilty on all counts, the foreman read: wire fraud, money laundering, elder abuse, and conspiracy to commit murder. We find the defendant, Dominique Sterling, guilty on all counts. The judge adjusted his glasses and looked down at them. Hunter Sterling, he said, his voice booming, you preyed on the vulnerable. You stole from the elderly to fund a life of excess. I sentence you to 15 years in federal prison. Hunter screamed. It was a raw, guttural sound. He slammed his fist on the table, shouting that it wasn't fair, but the marshals were already moving in. Dominique Sterling, the judge, continued. You betrayed the most sacred trust of all, the trust between a child and a parent. You stole your mother's past to pay for your future. I sentence you to 8 years in federal prison. Dominique didn't scream. She just went limp. The marshals pulled her up by her arms. As they led her away, she turned her head. She looked for Mama, but Mama had already walked out of the courtroom. So she looked at me. Her eyes were dark and hollow. There was no apology in them, just a cold, empty hatred. I watched her until the side door closed behind her. I didn't feel happy. I didn't feel sad. I just felt a heavy weight lift off my chest. The ledger was finally balanced. 6 months later, the brownstone on Abernathy Street looked like a scene from a holiday greeting card. Snow dusted the railing of the front porch, and a wreath made of fresh pine and holly hung on the black front door. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of cinnamon and roasting turkey. The house was alive. I stood on a stepladder, carefully placing a gold star on top of the 12-foot Christmas tree in the living room. Mama Estelle was sitting in her favorite armchair, conducting the placement of ornaments like she was leading a choir. A little to the left, Amara, she directed, pointing with her cane. No, not that left. Perfect. I stepped down and admired our work. The tree was covered in lights and ornaments that spanned 3 generations. There were glass balls from the 1950s, wooden soldiers from my childhood, and new crystal snowflakes we had bought together this year. The doorbell rang. It was David, our lawyer. He walked in, shaking snow off his coat, carrying a leather portfolio. Merry Christmas, ladies, he said, accepting a glass of eggnog from Mama. I have a present for you, he said, handing the portfolio to me. I opened it. Inside was the deed to the house. But it looked different. The owner wasn't listed as Amara Vance anymore. It was listed as the Estelle Vance Irrevocable Trust. It is done, David said. The house is now a protected asset. No one can touch it. Not a bank, not a creditor, and certainly not a family member looking for a payout. It belongs to the trust in perpetuity. I ran my hand over the paper. This was safety. This was assurance that no matter what happened to me or Mama, this home would stand. Thank you, David, I said. This is the best gift I could have asked for. David hesitated, reaching into his pocket. There is one more thing, he said. This came to my office yesterday. It was forwarded from the Federal Correctional Facility in Tallahassee. He handed me a plain white envelope. The return address was stamped in red ink. Inmate 8940. Dominique Sterling. I looked at Mama. She was sipping her eggnog, watching the fire. She saw the envelope, but she didn't say anything. She just nodded at the fireplace. I opened it. The letter was short, written on lined prison paper. Amara, it read. The food in here is inedible. I need money for the commissary. I know you sold my jewelry. Send me $500. It is the least you can do after you put me in here. D. I stared at the words. Even after everything, even after the trial, the prison sentence, and the loss of her freedom, she still believed she was owed something. She still thought she was the victim. There was no remorse, no inquiry about Mama's health, just a demand for money. I walked over to the fireplace. The logs were crackling, spitting orange sparks against the screen. Is it important? Mama asked, not looking away from the flames. No, Mama, I said. It is just junk mail. I tossed the envelope into the fire. The paper curled and blackened. The words turned to ash. I watched until the last piece of white paper disappeared into the glowing embers. I sat down on the rug next to Mama's chair. She reached down and stroked my hair just like she used to when I was a little girl. We do not choose the family we are born into. Biology is just a lottery. But we do choose how we protect ourselves. We choose who gets a seat at our table. For a long time, I thought family meant sacrificing your own peace to keep the peace. I thought it meant forgiving the unforgivable just because we shared the same blood. I was wrong. The sweetest revenge wasn't seeing Hunter in handcuffs or Dominique in a prison jumpsuit. That was just justice. The real revenge was this. It was the warmth of the fire. It was the smell of the tree. It was the safety of a home that was finally truly ours. I looked up at Mama. She was smiling at the tree, humming a Christmas hymn under her breath. I picked up my glass of wine. "To us, Mama," I whispered. She looked down at me, her eyes twinkling. "To us, Amara, and to the phoenix." We clinked glasses. The crystal rang out a clear, pure sound that echoed through the quiet house. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the scars of the past in a blanket of pristine white. The screen faded to black, but for the first time in a long time, my life was just beginning. This experience taught me that true power isn't about being the loudest voice in the room, but about having the courage to protect what matters most. I learned that toxicity, even from those we share blood with, should never be tolerated. By standing up for my mother and myself, I didn't just reclaim a house, I reclaimed our dignity. Family isn't defined by DNA, but by loyalty, respect, and love. Sometimes you have to let go of the people who hurt you to make room for the peace you deserve. If you've ever had to fight for your family against all odds, like and subscribe for more stories of justice and resilience.